So I'm going to just give a brief update on this FT challenge. The FT challenge you may think it's a new contest because it ran for the first time this last December, but what it really is a significant rule change in the exchange area of the FT roundup that's been going on since, 2018. So you may, those of you who have been contesting for a while may remember that Don Hill and I started the 10-meter RIDI contest back in 2011, the first weekend in December. And we run evolutions of that contest every year since then. And here's just a history of what that is. So the FT roundup, when FT8 was introduced in July, I guess it was, of 2017. And in 2018, we had the first FT8 contest that was ever organized, and ran that until, and then the next year FT4 came out, so we added that to the rules. That was pretty straightforward. And we ran that up until this last year, and we changed the rules for the exchange rules from the ARRL roundup rules of QTH or serial number to make the exchange exactly the default exchange that everybody that's on FT8 is using. So our goal was to make the contest absolutely transparent, that there was no way you could tell whether you were working somebody that was quote-unquote in the contest or not in the contest. And this was good for everybody that's on the air at that point in time, because it doesn't matter whether if you're not in the contest, you get what you need and you're happy and move on, and you can't really tell whether this person is going to take their log and send it into the contest or not, and you don't have to decide whether you are in the contest or not. So it solved the problem of what subband you're on. The contesters can go off and on the recommended subbands that we talk about and work each other. When they work everybody that's there, the rate goes down, they can go back to the default area, but we have a way to get some of the activity in the QRM out of the default area into a contest area. So basically, the community, everybody that's participating, based on what their behavior is, can work, and there's just no conflict. So I think this is unique. I think it's the first time we've had this sort of thing where you don't have this conflict or this tension between the everyday operators and contesters. So my thinking was, wow, this is such a great idea. We're going to have a great turnout, and as Tim showed on his slides, we had 550 logs submitted this last time. So we were surprised and, of course, disappointed that it wasn't higher, because it seems like anybody can work anybody is a pretty good format. So that's what it's all about. The other thing we did was we changed because we're using the daily exchange, you have the SNR and the grid square. So we changed the scoring to distance-based, which I think makes a lot of sense for most all of the FT contests, not try to do the classic historical sorts of exchanges we use in RIDI and CW and sideband, and really take advantage of the modes. And this makes a very strategic decision for operators about which mode they're going to be on, because on the FT8 mode, you have a higher probability of working longer distances and getting more QSO points and increasing your score. So it just gives you one more thing as an operator to juggle, another knob to turn in your recipe for increasing your score. So then the problem comes up, well, what about the everyday guys? So you go down into the normal daily subbands, and you get half or more of the people down there answer your CQ with TX2, right? They come back with their signal report, and you never get their grid if they answer that way. And so what do? So we decided that you still get the basic QSO point. What you don't get is distance points, because we don't know the grid. You haven't exchanged the grid in that contact. So you still get partial contact for that. And one of the techniques you can use, I think I cover on the this next slide on the third bullet there, or the fourth bullet, what you can do when you go down into the daily subbands is don't call CQ, because if you call CQ, you're going to get a large percentage of the answers are going to come back without the grid. But search around for people that are calling CQ themselves or have finished a call. Anywhere, if you get the grid, however you get it, that's all you need, and then you can call them. So you think about it, in the FT modes, the distinction that we're used to making between run and search to pounce really goes away. It's really irrelevant, because you can see everybody that's on the band, and if they're operating properly, which means they found their own clear frequency, so everyone's on a different frequency, you're not QRMing each other, and you can see everybody. It doesn't matter whether they are logically running or searching and pouncing. If they're finishing up a QSO, you can call them. Even better, you can call them while their QSO is in process, while the messages are going back and forth in their current QSO. You can call them, because you're not going to interfere with anything. They can see that on their screen and say, oh, I've got another station that's basically in the wings, basically ready to work me, wants to work me. As soon as I get to the sequence in my current QSO that I can, send my first message to them, I can roll right into that and avoid the CQ phase and so forth. So it's really, I think it gives us a very much different way of contesting, and we're still learning as participants in these contests how to take advantage of what's available in the FT modes. So one of the things in terms of strategy for this contest, or most any of the FT contests, is to alternate, make sure you alternate between odd and even modes. In other words, every few minutes, as your rate goes down, go back to switch from even to odd or vice versa, because there will be stations there that you're not hearing, and they may have just come on. And so you want to make sure that you get maximum exposure to that. Same thing between the two modes, and be sensitive depending on the contest rules. And like in this one, since it's distance-based, FT8, the majority of the time is going to be the best mode to be on to increase your score, just because with FT4 there's a lot more repeats, and so the fact that it's twice as fast intrinsically, that is on each cycle, may mean that the QSO time is really not a big advantage by the time you finish the actual QSO. And then of course alternate between the bands. And I already talked about the TX2 problem, how that's solved. And of course, if you're SO2R, it's really easy with the FT modes. You just got to make sure that each radio is on a different cycle, right? One's on odd cycle, the other's on even, and the basic protocol of FT keeps track of that. So anyway, I'm hoping that this contest gets more recognized and takes off, and we get better propagation or better participation, because I think it really is pretty unique in being able to solve the conflict and the overlap between the activity on the bands. And as we all know, the bands during the week are often completely quiet, except for these little tiny subbands where the FT people are QRMing each other in this really small space, and that's what we want to take advantage of in contesting. Okay, so I'm going to move. Yes, sir.
Two questions. What do you attribute the decrease in loss?
I don't know. The FT contests, I don't have those slides from my presentation there, but if you look at the FT contests compared to RIDI, they're lower participation. When the ALL had the FT modes as part of RIDI Roundup, and the total participation went up because basically the FT just added to what the RIDI was. If you look at those separated, I have a graph that shows that. The FT portion that was on top of RIDI was about half of what it is now that they're separate. So by separating, we got more participation on the two modes, but together, when they were in the same contest, people just made a choice. So I don't know, I think the FT contesting just hasn't taken off. I think it has potential. Whether it does depends on the community, but I think a lot of people, the masses just feel like, it's what they say, the common thing is saying, it's like watching paint dry. And so there's kind of this negative perception about this is really not a contesting mode because it's so slow. But in these Thursday night FT operations, people have figured out how you can roll between QSOs and cut out cycles. And with SO2R, you can theoretically, with FT4, get the rate up above 200. You get up to 240 an hour. Right, but the slowness of the cycles is not an inhibitor. Like I said, theoretically, you can get up above to 240. And the highest rates that we've recorded in RIDI contesting SO2R are less than 240. So the potential is there, but we're getting nowhere near that. I mean, about the biggest the highest rates we get in FT contests are up around 130, 140 with SO2R. And so I'm just saying the potential's there if we can get the participation up, because you got to have enough people there to work, right, on the band, and using some of these techniques. So maybe as we roll into the future, we'll move forward and we'll just see. That's one of the things that ham radio is great about, is experimenting and trying new things and moving into the future. So we'll see what happens.
One other question. So the fact that you're working people that don't even know they're in a contest, so they're not submitting logs, does that mess up the log checking at all?
So that's a nice segue into the next presentation on log checking. So the question was, for the people that don't submit a log, does that mess up the log checking? No. It turns out that we get, if you look at the number of QSOs across all the logs, in most contests we get the logs submitted for 90 to 95% of the QSOs. Okay, so we may not have 95% of all of the logs of all the calls that entered, but most of the casual people are lower numbers of QSOs. So we get 95% of the QSOs. So we can do a very good job on log checking. Second thing is that one of the things the log check software does is it creates reverse logs. So we create the logs that are missing. We create all the logs from the reverse logs, and we use that as in some of the log checking algorithms. So we can go in and let's say it's a serial number contest, and somebody doesn't submit a log, but they've got a QSO with a serial number, or I work them, and there's I log a QSO serial number of 274, but we have reverse logs that show the time that they were on, and the highest serial number they sent was 11. Well, we bust the exchange on my log because we have the reverse log. So we can do quite a bit with data mining and data processing. And by the way, with the logs, say we get 3,000 or 3,500 logs, on my home PC, I can run the entire log check, which prints out all of the data, the result files and everything ready for publishing in 30 seconds, can cross-check everything. Cross-check all the QSOs. It can be hundreds of thousands of QSOs, and that's the kind of processing power we have. So it's very different than the old days when we were looking at paper logs and trying to read things and see if we could find a mistake or two. So it's pretty good without that. Okay. So what I thought I would do is go through and talk about the log checking, and in particular the log checking report, because for almost all major contests now, there is a report that we do for every entrant that's available to you. In most contests, we send you an email after the contest with a link so you can go to it. In other contests where we haven't implemented that, you can just email the organizer, such as myself, the log checker, and I'll send it to you. So I'm going to talk about that log checking report. And the log checking, a lot of people think about it as, it's like the military or the police force trying to find you doing something wrong. And it's just the opposite. Think of it like, say you're in school and you're taking a course and you get a test. And again, it's not really a punitive thing, your grade that you get back. when your test is scored, but it's feedback to you about how what have you accumulated, what have you learned from that course. So it's not something that's negative, it's something that's very positive, because it's a tool that tells you where you might be able to improve your operating. So that's the way I want people to think about log checking report. It's not, our goal is not to try to find that you're bad in some way, but we want to feed back to you where your mistakes are. Because if there's common mistakes that you're making, it may be something you can do. I know one of the first big RIDI contests that I did, I got my log checking report back, and I had a whole bunch of nils, not in logs, which meant that I had logged a lot of QSOs that, other people had worked me, and they were not in my log. And it was a very high number. It was very suspicious. And I eventually found out that what I was doing in my operating, I was new to RIDI at the time, and my sequence of how I was running my hands over the keyboards, I was not hitting the enter key and recording QSOs that I worked. So I'd have a good QSO, work it, and then be distracted by the second or third radio and going over and working different stations and not actually hitting enter and recording the QSO that I had. It was a good QSO that I'd worked. So I created lots of nils for these other stations. So that's what I learned from the log checking report. So that's really, really helpful. And the log checking reports are equally beneficial to everybody in the contest. It doesn't matter whether you're trying to win or you only made a couple of QSOs. It really tells you. We get lots of logs, especially small logs with 10 or 15 QSOs, and sometimes all of them are bad for one reason or another. And to the extent that that person understands what we're feeding back to them, it can help them in operating their station. Here, going along working stations and not having valid QSOs. So if you, to talk about the log checking, first of all, need to understand the basic, or remind yourself of the basic way that contest works. Almost all contests are based on QSO points times multipliers. Your score is the multiplication of the QSO points and some definition of multipliers. But the QSO points can be 1 point per QSO, can be up to 7 points. In the ALL digital, they have distance scoring, or for every 500 kilometers, you get another point. So if you think about it, that could be up to 40 different points that you could have on a QSO. So that can vary a lot. So bad QSOs can be removed for one of three reasons. There can be not in log that I was just talking about, or the call sign could be busted, could be incorrect. That is, you could have the wrong call sign entered in your log, or the exchange could be wrong. And so those are the three type of errors you could have. And in most contests, if any of those three things happen, you lose that QSO. But if you think about it, that QSO could have a multiplier tied to it. It could be the only multiplier you worked in that contest. So you also lose the multiplier, which changes this score formula. And the points in these points contests, especially the FT contests where you have the distance contacts, you really want to make sure you don't lose those out of your log, because there are a lot of points. A 7-point contact is like 7 QSOs of a close-in station. So that's very important. So your score reduction is always going to be, almost all cases, is going to be 2 or 3 times what your error rate is. So you may have made 4 errors, that is, you lost 4 QSOs, but your score reduction may have come down much more than that. Now, it always shocks people, about how much their score changed, but that's the leverage that you have in the way the scoring formula works. So I'm going to go through, well, first of all, let me make a couple comments about the log check report. So commonly we call the LCR or log check report, but it's also referred to sometimes as a UBN, and those initials just stand for what I've written here on the slide. But it's the same thing. It's the same report that gives you the same type of information. So I talked about these two things: the error rate and the score reduction. Those are the two kind of top level things that you can look at. but the report shows a lot more detail to break that down to show you where you might be able to improve. And then these three areas here are the highlighted, the three things that contribute to lost scores. So this is just a breakdown of how the error rate and the score reduction relate to one another. And you can see that depending on it, well, so there's a third way that error rates and score reduction can diverge from one another, why score reduction gets, even higher. And that is that in some contests we actually have penalties. So not only do you lose the QSO, potentially a multiplier, and the QSO points that were associated with that QSO, you may also get penalized additional QSO points. And it's usually in terms of QSO points. So for example, in the worldwide contests, we actually have a penalty of 2 times the QSO points for all of the modes except for FT, which I'll talk about in a minute, but for RIDI, CW, and sideband. So you wind up equivalently losing 3 times the QSO points for every lost QSO, in addition to, a mult that might have been in there. For the FT contest, we've backed off that to just 2 because the nil rate, as you've heard me talk many times, is 3 times higher in all the FT contests compared to RIDI or CW or sideband. And that's due to a problem that I explained many times in other presentations, but we won't go into here today.
Can I ask a question there?
Sure.
Why differentiate between a busted call sign and a busted exchange? There's no penalty for a busted exchange, just lose the QSO. For a busted call sign, there's a penalty. What's the rationale?
So it depends on the contest in terms of, so I just gave an example of one contest, but for the worldwide contest, we want to, basically, if you get the call right, the zone, for example, is comes through super check partial. So we really want to put an encouragement on people getting the call right, not guessing the call, okay? On the exchange, especially in worldwide, since there will be a few people in the contest that don't send the right exchange, and so then you're confused. What do? You know this person's zone, but they're sending something else. Do you put in what they sent, or so it makes it's confusing. So we don't consider that as big of an error in terms of feedback to users, but getting the call right in that contest is really important. In the FT modes, because of this nil problem, there are a lot of very good QSOs that just don't get logged by one partner or the other because they think it wasn't valid because they didn't get a third QSL message, when in fact the QSO was complete, everything was exchanged. And so you get some penalty for that to keep pressure on the community to solve that problem, but we don't think we should be as punitive as we are in the other modes. Okay, so on the log checking report overall, we give this section, which gives the overall statistics for the contest. So what below this will be your own personal statistics, so you can compare that to what the overall contest did. And what we show here are the busted exchange, missing exchanges, busted calls, and not in logs. And these are the median of what's in the contest.
What if you worked at a station on several different bands, but you have a different exchange on one band?
So the question is, if you work a station on multiple bands that have different exchanges on that, we will know again from log checking, from the logs that if we receive the other log or the reverse log that we create, whether the other person made an error and switched their exchange partway through, or whether, for whatever reason, you just had the wrong exchange. So most loggers will pre-fill the exchange that you got in the last so once you work a station, it'll pre-fill that exchange for the next contacts. But regardless of that, if it's the case that you just described, you'll get busted for the ones that are wrong, okay? Unless we can detect that your QSO partner switched exchanges somewhere through the contest, and we can tell that from the reverse logs. So this is the case where I've highlighted here, gives your error rate and the score. So the first thing to understand is what I talked about earlier about why those two things are different and how those are different. And so this slide, and you can look at this later, just goes through and shows the detail of how that calculation is made, where it's coming from the numbers. So as you're looking at all these numbers that you get, well, how did you compute that score? And it shows all of that. Okay, this slide moves on into showing how the score reduction is coming about. And you can see that in this, I used one of my previous contests as the log checking report to illustrate this. This shows that the error rate was 2.7%. So almost 3% of the QSOs I had had an error in them for some reason. But my score reduction was 6.2%, and that just shows the leverage, the multiplying factor of the penalties and the multipliers and QSO points. And so as we just go through these slides, they just increase. You can look at these offline later. Just shows the math on how this goes together. So if you're ever curious about doing a deep dive on your report and how we got to the numbers we did, this is a way to look at that. So it just goes through, and I've annotated the report to show you how all of those come down. So going quickly through the rest of the sections in the report, this section shows the results by band. So up to this point, we were just showing overall for the contest. This shows the breakdown by band. Raw is what you submitted. Your loggers talk about claim score, and the Cabrillo log talks about claim score. That's what your logger thought that you were submitting, and oftentimes that's not exactly the same as the raw score because it depends on whether you had the latest multiplier file in your logger, and so there can be differences in what we compute and what you compute, but basically it's what you submitted without any errors subtracted, and then the final is what we've done after the log checking. So there's that comparison by band. And then there are a number of sections. So this is the section that is the not in log. So it lists every QSO that was not in my QSO partner's log. I logged it, but it was not in their log, and shows the exchange and everything. Here's the incorrect call, the busted call, same thing, shows all the QSOs. And here's the busted exchanges, all the QSOs that I had busted exchanges in. So I can go through that, and oftentimes you'll see to the question about if you work somebody on multiple bands, you'll see that I got it wrong the first time I worked them, and then it just propagated through because I, for whatever reason, didn't copy. I saw it pre-filled, and maybe I was delirious or working on another radio or something. I just made a human mistake and didn't change what was actually, what I actually received printed on the screen to what my logger had from the pre-fill. So that's an example of how you can use this to find problems. And then there's a section what we call unique calls. So a unique call is a call that is across all the logs that we have, all the QSO data that we have is only in your log. It's only there once. And a lot of those we bust, and we know from experience and from data that 99.9% of those, in most cases, are busted calls. The exception to that is a rare DX station where a lot of casual stations will get on and work, one or two of them, and that's all. So they truly are unique. It's a genuine unique, and we can tell that just from the call, knowing what the station is. But 99% of these uniques are actually busted calls. There are a few European contests where the contest management actually bust the call. They take the QSO out of your log if they don't find it in 3 more logs or 5 more logs. We do not do that in all the domestic or the U.S. sponsored contests that I know about. We give you the benefit of the doubt. So if we can't prove that unique QSO, unique call sign, was actually busted in some way or another, then we don't subtract it. But we give you a list, and so what I encourage you to do is look at this list and think to yourself, those are probably busted calls. So that's feedback to you, but it doesn't subtract from your score. Yes, sir.
You said that the validate that those busted calls are in fact actual valid call signs?
We can for when we have the databases. So for example, on that list, sometimes we'll say incorrect call, but we won't tell you what the correct call is, and that's because we don't know what it was because it's not in the FCC database, right? So if it's not in the FCC, we get the FCC updates their database daily. So on the weekend of the contest, we get that data, so we know what a legal, valid U.S. call is, and we bust them if it's not on their list. Multipliers by bands just gives you a list of all your multipliers on each band, and then we give you kind of the reverse. We have sections that tell you what other QSOs that were deducted from other logs of QSO partners that were QSO. Here's stations that copied me incorrectly, and that can be useful to see maybe there's something I'm doing that's causing that, right? If I see a common thread or something that's going on, so it's worthwhile to look at that. Almost all of these are clearly mistakes on their end, but you can see that.
It's interesting how the log checking software has gotten good at identifying multi-character busts.
Yes.
More than one character. It's surprisingly good.
Yeah, we have algorithms that look at off by 1 and off by 2, just like super check partial you can usually set up. So the log checking's got very sophisticated with the algorithms and the CPU power that we have available nowadays. These are stations that got nils from me that I caused, and then ones that got my exchange incorrectly. So depending on the contest, this may or may not be, or may be more or less meaningful. So that's a quick tour through log checking reports. If you have, first of all, please get your log checking reports. It's totally a benefit to you. It gives you feedback on your operating, and it's not something that is a negative thing on you at all. It's all a very positive benefit that you can use. And if you have any questions about it, please ask me or whoever the contest manager or log checker is, because we want to help everybody improve their operating skill to the extent that they're motivated and willing to do that. Okay, so we're at the end. If you have questions, I'll be happy to take them, or any of us offline.